Respected doctors. Today, we are going to have a webinar on our very interesting topic, which is called as obstructive jaundice in with the future perspective management. We have Dr. H.V. Shivaram. Dr. H.V. Shivaram is our speaker for the day. He is the head of the Department of Surgery and Allied Specialties and director at the GI and Pediatric Surgery at Aster CMI Hospital, Bangalore. He is a National Executive Committee member of the ASI, Executive Board member of Obesity and Metabolic Surgery of Society of India, a PG teacher at the National Board of Examinations, has written many book chapters, and has n number of publications in both national as well as international journals. On behalf of Zydus Cadila, I, Dr. Salim Patel, welcome Dr. H.V. Shivaram and hand over the session to him, who will take the proceedings forward. Thank you, sir. Can you take on, sir, please?
Thank you, Dr. Salim. I bring greetings from Aster CMI Hospital, Bangalore. Today's topic is on obstructive jaundice, current perspectives. I am being told to be as simple and to the topic, especially for junior doctor surgeons and postgraduates. All of you know what is obstructive jaundice. It is the jaundice which occurs when the flow of bile from the liver to the intestine is blocked on its pathway. Many times the obstructive jaundice and the surgical jaundice are used as synonymous words, but there is a difference. Surgical jaundice is any jaundice which is amenable or correctable by surgical interventions. All obstructive jaundices need not be requiring surgery. Not all obstructive jaundice is surgical jaundice like in hepatitis, and not all surgical jaundice is due to obstruction. Congenital spherocytosis, jaundice disappears. Most common cause of biliary obstruction, as you all know, is the gallstone disease, which is prevalent all over the world. Anatomy of the bile ducts and the liver is well known. Only thing I want to emphasize that the bile which is produced from the liver, 50% goes directly to duodenum and another 50% is stored in the gallbladder and then released in response to the meal whenever it is required. Hepatobiliary tree, whether it is intrahepatic or the extrahepatic, wherever there is pathway obstruction that can cause the obstructive jaundice. The classifications are many, but most important is clinical types and of the which Benjamin has described, and the anatomical types, whether according to etiology we can say whether it's metabolic, mechanical, or the benign and malignant. Complete obstruction is the one where there is classical symptoms with biochemical changes. It can occur in like in tumors, carcinoma head of the pancreas, where there is complete obstruction, iatrogenic bile duct injuries, cholangiocarcinoma, or the parenchymal liver disease. Type 2 is the intermittent obstruction. Here the symptoms and typical biochemical changes may be there, but jaundice may or may not be present. So this occurs in some of these conditions like the choledocholithiasis, periampullary tumors, duodenal diverticula, choledochal cyst, papillomas, hemophilia, and so on and so forth. So here there is intermittent obstruction, and jaundice may not be very obvious in these cases. Type 3 is the chronic incomplete obstruction. Here the classical symptoms may or may not be there, but pathological changes are definitely present in the bile duct and also in the liver. So this occurs in all types of strictures of the CBD, congenital, traumatic, sclerosing cholangitis, post-radiotherapy. All these strictures can cause us chronic incomplete obstruction. Also in the stenosed biliary enteric anastomosis, cystic fibrosis, chronic pancreatitis, stenosis of the sphincter of Oddi, all these cases, chronic incomplete obstruction. Segmental obstruction or the type 4 is because of the one or more segments in the intrahepatic biliary tree is obstructed. This can occur in trauma, sclerosing cholangitis, or intrahepatic stones, and all these things can cause the type 4 obstruction. Anatomically, we can classify as the bile duct. In the bile duct, it can be in the lumen, the stones or parasites. In the wall, the obstruction may be because of the choledochal cyst, sclerosing cholangitis, cholangiocarcinoma, bile duct injury. All these things cause the wall problem. Then the extrinsic, that is extraluminal, like in Mirizi, pancreatitis, chronic pancreatitis, pancreatic cancer, malignant nodes, they can obstruct the bile duct from outside. When you come to the ampulla, that's the lower end, it can be periampullary carcinoma or tumor invading the ampulla. So this is a pictorial demonstration of the intraluminal causes, the extrinsic or extraluminal causes, and the mural causes for the bile obstruction on its pathway to the intestine. So one of the cause is basically this bile duct injury or the bile duct ligation, which used to happen very commonly when we all started the laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So this concept of critical view of safety has reduced this to a great extent, wherein we completely expose and delineate the hepatocystic triangle, identify a single duct and a single artery entering the gallbladder, and then completely dissect the lower part of the gallbladder of the liver bed. So this, the critical view of safety, has become much more important now than the callous triangle. SAGES has given guidelines and 6 strategies we should do to avoid any bile duct injury and causing obstructive jaundice. Use the critical view of safety method, as I explained. Intraoperative time out before cutting or clipping. Ask your assistant whether okay to clip or cut so that you can avoid. So 2 opinions are always better. Understand potential aberrant anatomy. If there is something abnormal, stop, don't proceed further. Liberal use of cholangiogram to identify the anatomy. Recognize a risky dissection and stop, halt, and then complete after all the safety maneuvers. And then get help from an experienced surgeon if you are stuck in the problem, which we call as the colleaguography. Take the help from your colleague. All these things, when practiced, have definitely reduced the bile duct injuries, bile duct clipping, and ligation causing obstructive jaundice. This has to be practiced, these 6 strategies. So this is one video of long time ago. I was called for the bile duct post-surgery bile duct injury reconstruction. So at that time I took up this video, which was given by the surgeon who had done the surgery. If you see here how the misperception occurs, there is a very, floppy gallbladder, very floppy gallbladder. It's almost, when it is lifted up, that's a duodenum, which is being dissected down, which was adherent to the gallbladder. After that, this exactly when you do an excessive traction, this looks like a cystic duct directly going to the gallbladder. So that looks like a callous triangle dissection, and you can see how the straightened duct is misperception as the cystic duct. Here you can see that looks like a cystic artery. So the operating surgeon is very happy to clip that, thinking that that is the cystic artery. And then after clipping, cutting it. So when you see such big ducts which has a different vascular pattern, we had to be very, very cautious and probably do a cholangiogram and see or ask another colleague and find out. So here this duct is clipped, because if you see when there is a traction and all, it looks exactly like a cystic duct. So many clips already, 4, 5, 6 clips on this, and then cut cystic artery and supposed to be cystic duct, but it looks so big. Anyway, it's cut, there is bleeding again, and again clipping. So when we put more clips, that means there is something going wrong. We had to be very, very cautious and careful. Time to help, time to stop. But those days, the concept of the critical view of safety was not so prevalent. This is the video of 2011, I think. So you can see there is golden bile coming. Wash given, and then again the gallbladder is, even the hook is not of the good quality. You can see it is touching the metal clip. There is bile coming there. It's from the hilum of the liver. So surgeon thinks there is something problem. He uses another port, but unfortunately clips this duct also, and there is no chance of bile leak now. Everything is clipped. So there are clips, 9, 10 clips, and the gallbladder is removed. So this, it was a bile duct injury, and finally that required a hepatico-jejunostomy later. So what I want to say is, it's very, very important to look at the clinical, the safety triangle, and then proceed. The presentation of obstructive jaundice depends on the duration and also what type, everything. Typically, you have to take the history of jaundice type and details of the jaundice, itching, whether there is any fever, abdominal pain, weight loss, fast surgery like laparoscopic cholecystectomy, gallstones history, GI bleed, everything. When there is a total obstruction, the itching or pruritus may be very severe. Exactly why the pruritus comes is not very clear, possibly related to the accumulation of bile acids, bile salts in the skin, or related to release of endogenous opioids after obstructive jaundice. Physical examination, jaundice, nodes, examine the nails, very shiny nails they may have sometimes. There may be distended gallbladder when you palpate abdomen, mass, umbilicus. If there is any mass or ascites, better to do a rectal examination and see. This is a Troisier sign, which you are all very familiar with, the Virchow's node, which occurs as a secondary deposit in the neck. Courvoisier's law, which is another thing which all postgraduates and junior surgeons should know. When there is CVD obstruction due to a stone disease, gallbladder is usually contracted and not distended because of the inflammatory changes. When there is obstruction due to growth, it causes distension of the gallbladder. Anyway, there are some exceptions, like in the double impaction, a stone in the cystic duct and the CBD, it may be palpable gallbladder. Complications of obstructive jaundice, it depends on the duration and intensity of obstruction. Usually after a month, there is cell damage, and later, if it continues, it can cause secondary biliary cirrhosis. Acute cholangitis is many times a killer because of sepsis. So it has to be relieved immediately. and treated very aggressively. Chronic obstruction can cause malabsorption, malnutrition, steatorrhea, and impaired hemostasis because of the essential vitamin not getting absorbed, secondary biliary cirrhosis, and cutaneous xanthomatosis. So when you have an obstructive jaundice patient, very carefully we should take the history and clinical examination and then do a liver function test, which if it is normal, probably it is hemolysis or congenital hyperbilirubinemia. If it is abnormal, then we should do an ultrasound abdomen, which shows whether there is dilated bile duct, which is due to obstruction, or there is non-dilated ducts. So if there are non-dilated ducts, probably it's not an obstructive jaundice. We should look at other causes and etiology of acute or chronic liver disease and do the viral markers, autoimmune markers. And sometimes a liver biopsy may be required, rarely. Dilated ducts means biliary obstruction. So evaluate for the cause and what is the extent of the obstruction by a proper imaging. So ultrasound itself may not be sufficient in that cases. Just to complete all investigation for the obstructive jaundice. So after the biochemical examination, it's most important is to do the ultrasound scan by a good sonologist and a good ultrasound machine. So if that doesn't give much information, then we should do a good CT scan, contrast enhanced CT scan, and sometimes in MRI maybe or MRCP may be required. So this is very important to properly delineate the extent of the disease and also the stages and also the operability. All these things will be assessed by a good quality CT scan. Radionuclide scan is hardly utilized these days. MRCP is like a road map, but nowadays it is mostly replaced by the endoscopic ultrasound. Again here, most important is the operator and also the sensitivity. And the most important in this is we can take endoscopic ultrasound guided biopsy and we can have a diagnosis before going for the surgery. ERCP or spyglass cholangiopancreatoscopy is another very important tool whenever we have to do some therapeutic procedure like the stenting or go to the bile duct or the pancreatic duct and remove the stones. It also allows for the biopsy and the very, very useful in especially in the cases of acute cholangitis, stenting, and we can save the patients. Tumor markers like CA19-9 in the pancreatic tumor obstruction also, it's very useful. PET-CT is another tool we may use sometimes if you think there are distant metastases or you want to have another investigation to collaborate your clinical suspicion or other things you have not confirmed anything. Sometimes if the patient have to go for surgery, it's better to do a staging laparoscopy. Especially we can look at peritoneal metastasis, which may be missed from other evaluation methods. CT scan, I explained, and also MRCP is the roadmap for biliary tree, which can detect not only obstruction one side, both the sides, and give a very good information if you have to go in for the surgery. Management of obstructive jaundice, it's a team effort. We have to work together, the medical gastroenterology team and the surgical GI team, many times radiologist, anesthetist, and see that the patient goes home in good condition. Many things are amenable to endoscopic treatment. Surgical options, we have open laparoscopic or robotic surgery. Sometimes, like in the biliary stones and all, we may have to first do the endoscopic clearance and then followed by the surgery. All the time we may not be able to do the curative surgery itself. Sometimes it may be the palliative procedures. Like here, the side beam endoscopy done and a biopsy taken, it can help in further in the periampullary tumors. Here, the ERCP stone extraction, once that is done, the next thing is to do a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. It's a neuroendocrine tumor which was assessed initially by the CT and then by the endoscopic biopsy. Many times there may be doubts whether it is stone versus tumor. These situations have become very rare nowadays. Otherwise, earlier we used to have this problem. Clinical features favoring the CBD stones or lesser the age, biliary colic, fever, and transient spike in the amylase or the AST. Features favoring the tumor are painless jaundice, weight loss, palpable gallbladder, and higher bilirubin levels. So cholangioscopy or pancreatoscopy, I already explained, very useful tool whenever it is available. Surgical management, whether it is open surgery, laparoscopic, or robotic, sometimes we have to decide after a careful decision. Perioperative management of obstructive jaundice is very, very important, and we cannot just take away an obstructive jaundice patient to the surgery and get into trouble. It's important to put them on the broad spectrum antibiotic prophylaxis before the intervention. If there is any coagulopathy that may have to be corrected by vitamin K or fresh frozen plasma, if there is a nutrition problem that has to be corrected, pre-operative hydration, and it's very important, patient may require urinary catheter to monitor the urine output post-surgery, careful post-operative fluid balance, and the electrolyte management is important. Some cases we may have to consider pre-operative biliary drainage, especially if we are delaying the surgery because of various reasons. An obstructive jaundice cannot be immediately cannot go for surgery. We may have to do a stenting. If the patient has to go for a neoadjuvant chemotherapy, then or radiotherapy, the patient may require stenting. Medically uncontrollable pruritus and jaundice, cholestasis with sustained high bilirubin, and if there is a severe cholangitis, they require an urgent biliary drainage, and once they come out of sepsis, then consider for surgery. These are various types of surgeries like the CBD exploration, biliary stricture. So this is just to show you iatrogenic bile duct stricture. Hepatico-jejunostomy is being performed. The radical cholecystectomy for the cancer gallbladder, which nowadays can be done robotic or laparoscopic also. Whipple's pancreaticoduodenectomy, basically resection part and the reconstruction part for the malignant tumor, whether it is ampullary tumors or the carcinoma of the duodenum, head of the pancreas masses, cholangiocarcinoma. Sometimes there may be difficulty assessing whether it is a benign or malignant, and sometimes some of the patients may require surgery on the clinical grounds only. Pancreatic duct adenocarcinoma causing obstruction, chronic pancreatitis with carcinoma head of the pancreas. Again, these are the cases where you have to consider carefully how much surgery is beneficial. Liver resections sometimes may be required. So to summarize this short presentation, very important to take good history, do proper clinical examination. This itself will reveal a lot of things and help us in further what perfect evaluation to be done. Basically, LFT and ultrasound examination, and then decide further evaluation whether we have to go for imaging or for the endoscopic ultrasound and the ERCP or other things. Very important to involve the team management in the obstructive jaundice, medical team, surgical team. Many times a multidisciplinary team meeting will help. Decide whether endoscopic or the surgical management is appropriate, or initially endoscopic and then surgery is required. Always and always adequately prepare the patient before surgery and then take up for surgery. A good hepatobiliary surgery expertise is required in most of these cases. And if the experience of the surgeon is not adequate, better to refer the patient to the center where these surgeries are done routinely. Also, along with the patient, have the option of open laparoscopy or robotic surgery in this era of modern days of surgery. So ladies and gentlemen, in this COVID days, it is very appropriate to take home this message that all looks yellow to the jaundiced eye. So earlier, people used to think people who have yellow or jaundice, everything what they looks yellow. It's an idiom. Alexander Pope used this in 17th century. So let us not be prejudiced for anything in life, whether to our colleagues or to the patients or any situation, and appropriately assess. Let us not judge anything. Let us act according to science and according to our conscience, and let us be helpful to everybody in these difficult times. Thank you everybody.
Thank you, sir, for a lovely deliberation. It was an excellent talk, very crisp and very to the point. We have quite a good number of questions just come from Pan India. So okay. I'll start asking you the question, sir.
Right.
The question which has come is from Dr. Apurva Shah from Ahmedabad.
Okay.
His question is the role of gut preparation and use of mannitol preoperatively in patients of obstructive jaundice.
Yes, this was the case earlier. As of now, we have stopped using mannitol, and also there is no need to prepare the gut in these patients. What is important is I told you about the preoperative preparation basically involves proper hydration and also the electrolyte balance. You should check whether the nutrition is all right and whether the patient is fit to undergo surgery, whether his urine output is all right, creatinine, all these things are all right. Otherwise, as of now, there is no role for mannitol and also the gut preparation in these patients.
Right, sir. Excellent. The second question is from Dr. Moshmi. She's from Bhubaneswar. Her question is, what are the recent drugs for the medical management of jaundice?
I think she's asking about the obstructive jaundice management for pruritus.
Yeah, so she has written it as a recent drug therapy for medical management of jaundice. So probably
medical jaundice or surgical jaundice?
Medical management of jaundice. That is the question, sir.
Okay. I think it depends on the etiology.
Right.
What we are dealing, whether it's a viral hepatitis or other types of parenchymal disease, whether it is autoimmune disease. So I will not go into all the details. Right. If the patient is pruritic and obstructive jaundice, very simple. Sometimes we use drugs, cholestyramine or rifampicin in these patients to basically to increase the bile salt absorption and the relief of the pruritus in these patients. Otherwise, in obstructive jaundice, the medical therapy won't help. We have to relieve the obstruction either by endoscopic method or by the surgical methods in these patients.
Right, sir. Excellent. The next question is from Dr. Anil Kumar Belad from Belgaum. His question is, which is a more important investigation, MRCP or ERCP?
Okay. Again, it depends on the situation, what you see in the ultrasound. This is a very important question you have asked. See, if you are suspecting a tumor, like a periampullary carcinoma or a carcinoma of the head of the pancreas, all these things, best thing is to get a good CT scan. So we have, see, contrast enhanced CT scan. Many places they do CT, but some of the machines may not be good. A good 64 slice CT and a good evaluation of the head of the pancreas and that area, plus the vascular anatomy, all these things will give a very good information about how to manage it. And also if you have to a patient has to undergo surgery, whether vascular involvement, other areas involvement, lymph nodes, all this information will give. So what I can say is, if you are suspecting more of a tumor, do a good CT scan before doing any intervention. But if you have a patient of obstructive jaundice, because post-cholecystectomy or if there is a bile duct injury or something, the best is to do a MRCP. So because it gives a good evaluation of the bile duct of proximal and also distal. So many people do ERCP, but ERCP can give only distal part and it's more of therapeutic. Sometimes we may introduce infection also. So if there is a bile duct injury or the ligation of the bile duct or the biliary anatomy problems you are doing, best is to do an MRCP. So that is very good investigation to do for the roadmap for the biliary tree is MRCP. And if you want to assess the surrounding area extent and the tumor or anything, good CT scan is much more useful. Sometimes both may be required as a complementary to each other. So that also again the clinician has to decide according to the situation there.
Right, right. Next question is from Dr. Jamshed Mullah. He's from Behrampur.
Right.
The question is, what is your treatment plan for obstructive jaundice with ascites?
Obstructive jaundice with ascites. So again, you have to assess what is the cause for ascites. So here, whether it is a nutritional problem, whether it's a biliary cirrhosis, advanced obstruction causing this, whether it is because of the secondaries in the peritoneal cavity which has caused ascites. So best is to have a good imaging and then take the ascites for the tapping and assess biochemically and also cytologically, see whether there is malignancy or anything. I think it again depends on the situation and the causes of jaundice in that cases. Sometimes there may be advanced cirrhosis with portal hypertension. All these things have to be imaged and also biochemical liver LFT and the assess and cytology of the ascites may also required in these cases.
Right, sir. Excellent. So coming to the next question, this is from Varanasi by Dr. Radhesham Keshri.
Right.
He wants to know about recent advances in the management of obstructive jaundice. Even you can comment on robotic if possible.
Right. So recent management of obstructive jaundice, I think I explained most of the things. The recent, most of the many centers have the spyglass which can go inside the bile duct or the pancreatic duct, the cholangiopancreatoscopy, and that is a very good instrument whether you want to take a biopsy or a breast biopsy or a good look inside. And then a lot of endoscopic advancement are there nowadays. The and also in the robotic surgery we have a lot of imaging modalities also. We can look at whether there is biliary anatomy, all these things. There are a lot of advances which have occurred in the laparoscopic surgery also in these cases. Anyway, I think it's too much to go into the depth of it.
Right.
There are a lot of advancements. What we were doing earlier, about 5 years or 10 years ago, has, I think, completely changed the way we manage the obstructive jaundice, whether it is endoscopically or surgically.
Right, sir. Okay. So coming to another question, this is from Dr. Hari Prasad from Bangalore.
Right.
He wants to know, yeah, he wants to know the protocol for pancreaticojejunostomy leak in a post-Whipple's patient.
Post
Whipple.
Whipple's patient.
Yes, sir.
Pancreaticojejunostomy leak.
Leak. Yes, sir.
Okay, again, this is a little bit of deviation from our
Right, sir.
main topic. Anyway, in these cases, what is important is if you have kept a drain, most of the time it leaks through the drain. What you should not allow is to collect inside. So pancreaticojejunostomy leak is there after Whipple's or so. So most important to do the imaging and also the grade of leak. And if it is collecting inside, the first thing is to take the help of the interventional radiologist and drain it outside. If it is already draining outside, you estimate how much is the output and then look at it, nutrition of the patient and whether it is collecting anywhere outside and if there is any sepsis occurring. If there is no sepsis, if it is coming out through the drain, there is nothing much to worry. Most of the time it can stop. The only thing you have to maintain is the nutrition and see that there is no sepsis. Nutrition, whether most of the people put a feeding jejunostomy, that's very useful if there is a leak. Otherwise, you may have to give a parenteral nutrition or you may have to put a nasojejunal tube beyond that and then feed also. So nutrition is very important. Taking care of sepsis is important. And if it continues and erodes into other areas, there may be hemorrhage. So be careful. Otherwise, most of the time, these leaks will stop. If there is a good pancreaticojejunostomosis has been done and nutrition is maintained and there is no sepsis, I don't think anything much to worry.
Much to right, sir. One more question, sir. Now, this is a common question asked by at least 6 people so far. So, the question is, sir, after cholecystectomy, lap col, there are many patients who complain of bloating in the abdomen and flatulence.
Right.
So, what could be the reason for this? Even post 1 or 2 years after surgery, they have been complaining of this. So, what is your take on that?
This, most of the time, these are dyspepsia, we call it as. There may be motility disorders of the stomach. Sometimes, some of them may be diabetic patients. Okay. Also, I can't attribute this to the laparoscopic cholecystectomy or anything. Okay. Probably you may have to assess much more in detail whether there is a motility problem, whether there is a GERD problem. Patient may require an upper GI endoscopy and see. And some of the patients have prejudice prior to surgery itself that if you done the gallbladder is removed, right, they will have these symptoms.
Right.
So I think a lot of you have to sit with the patient, talk to them and explain, and probably this will help. If there is a biliary dyskinesia or the sphincter of Oddi syndrome, they also can cause. Sometimes the bile thinning agents may help, but all depends on the cause and assessment of these situations.
Right, sir.
Right.
So another common question raised by 3 or 4 people.
Right.
It is saying that now in the COVID scenario, now since you are a surgeon, sir, you're more into the operative part. So how do you manage your OT in this COVID scenario? How do you control the OT traffic and what precautions you will take?
Okay. When there was lockdown, all the elective surgeries are still, we are in lockdown. Right. Surgeries were stopped and only emergency surgeries were being done. We also divided the surgeries, if required, to whether it is an emergency surgery, which requires surgery within hours. So you take all precautions like PPE and the anesthetist, and everybody takes precautions, and the patient, the COVID test was sent whenever possible, and we don't wait for the COVID test. So operate and put them separately in a COVID suspect ward. Whenever their people are handling, till the report comes, they were treated like a COVID positive patient, whether in the OT, preoperatively or post-surgery. When the COVID test comes negative or so, then they are treated like any other patient. Other category is the early surgery, like biliary problems or sepsis, or the patient has a fracture or something and requires surgery, or appendicitis, gangrenous or something which can wait within 24 hours. So we called as early surgeries. So those patients also underwent surgery. But whenever possible, we have done COVID test. If it is possible to wait 24 hours, get the report, and then do surgery with precautions, but not the high level PPE, moderate level and use. But all cases nowadays, we are covering ourselves. We are using the N95 mask. We are using the face protection with the face shield and the full fluid repellent gown, OT gown, and the shoe cover in the foot. So these are precautions routinely we are taking. And all surgeries we are doing, whatever the required surgery at present, we are doing COVID test, the RT-PCR 24 hours earlier, and then taking up surgery. This facility may not be available in all the places, especially rural areas and smaller towns. They have to take a lot of precautions. Totally, we cannot depend only on the test. We have to take the good history of the patient, whether they have fever, throat pain, and where they are coming from, whether they are coming from the containment zone, red zone, whether they had any history of contact with the patients who had COVID. So many things, everything put together, we have to protect ourselves, not only protecting ourselves, we have to protect our co-workers also in the OT and in the hospital. So we have to take a lot of care, precautions, and if the patient is positive for COVID, better to send them to the COVID hospitals where they are separately being managed.
Right, right. And so one final question, sir. This is from our benefit point of view as well. So your indications in which you would be using a UDCA molecule?
Okay, UDCA, we use a lot of it actually. One is where there is high chances of patients developing gallstones.
Okay.
It is proved, like in the severe weight loss patients have undergone the medical management or the surgical management for weight loss. So they are going to massively lose weight, like the post-bariatric surgery. We give UDCA for 6 months. Okay, morning one and evening one, 6 months, and this has prevented a lot of them developing stones in the gallbladder, because during the weight loss period, the bile becomes thicker and then they may develop stone. The other indication is patients are symptomatic for the gallstones, but they have to postpone the surgery for some time. So we use UDCA to make the bile thinner. Okay, like maybe pregnancy, or the patient has biliary colic again and again, but not able to get surgery done immediately because of, so those patients also put. And there are a lot of, like what you said earlier, dyspepsias, like bloating and other symptoms, post-cholecystectomy symptoms, which sometimes amenable to these medications. They also can be benefited by the UDCA. The sphincter of Oddi syndrome is again, sometimes some of them develop benefited by these medications.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering all our questions in such a crisp and a nice manner, sir. We thank you for your participation today with us, for giving us such a good deliberation. We thank all our audience for joining us today. It was an excellent session by Dr. Shivaram. We wish everybody to stay safe at home. This is the COVID pandemic scenario. We should maintain social distancing as well as hand hygiene. And God bless us all from this pandemic. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Salim Patel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. I think we had a good interaction, good discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Bye. Bye.